Hey everybody, I am Dawn Marie Solis with Neuro Awesome Life, and I am so excited to be talking with Kassandra Clemens. Kassandra and I have been sort of in each other's edges, in each other's, at least we've known each other since about 2022. Um, and I've been so excited about the work that you do, and we kind of reconnected recently. And because I'm not going to let you tell people mostly about you, but I do want to just mention up front that you're the founder and executive director of Heal Your Confidence Community Interest Company, and you're based in the UK. And that today we are going to be talking about intrusive thoughts, which is a topic that's near and dear to me because I struggle with that. So I'm excited. Please tell people about yourself in any way that you would like.
Oh, okay, that's a tall task. I'm very complex neurodivergent, but I found that out late in life. So I went through an awful lot of chaos in my life. Um, Also, what I was aware of to some extent, I was very trauma impacted, basically from the beginning of, as far as I can think back. So all of these things have shaped my life quite a bit. And it was only when I started to understand, which took the better part of 15 years, I think, things unrolled slowly but surely. It can be amazing how long it takes you before you can see right what is in front of your nose. I think the change really started with something fairly unimportant to me. Actually, when I was in my 40s, I went to university for the first time. I was unable to do that when I was much younger. I tried, but I just couldn't. The neurodivergence is, and the trauma got in the way, but I didn't know anything about that at the time. So I went back to university totally without any clue, quite honestly, because my educational life had been very hit and miss, much more miss than hit. And after a little while, somebody suggested I should get a dyslexia diagnosis simply because these people gave out free computers. So it wasn't even about whether I was dyslexic or not. And I thought that was ethically very questionable. But I did go and I was diagnosed with dyslexia, which turns out to be definitely true, but not in a way that has really shaped my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It impacted on me, but not really shaped my life. What shaped my life is what I found out at the same time, but I wasn't officially diagnosed with. It was the assessor who saw me walk in. He said, "You are dyspraxic." And he explained to me what that was, and that totally made sense. And I think it's much more the cognitive dyspraxia than the dyslexia that really has made my life difficult. I mean, who cares whether a sentence comes out with proper spelling. But the trouble of not being able to put it together because the mind is too woolly, that made a real big, unfortunate difference to me. So that actually even explained why I didn't catch up at school at all. I started school at 7, which is quite late, but I come from a country where at that time it was quite normal. And I actually lost the connection with it all from day one. It felt I'd never had gotten a grounding. And that unfortunately was very what's the right word? It actually rippled into everything. If you don't know how to speak properly, how to put sentences together. Eventually, I learned to read, but I must have been quite old when I felt more comfortable with that. My vocabulary was very low in our family. You wouldn't read to children, you wouldn't go to libraries. And so I had very little contact with all of that until I was much, much older. So all of that obviously impacted on that as well. And I always wanted to learn, but I didn't know how to. And I eventually managed to get into high school. But again, there was just no support at home, and the trauma impacted for far too long. But I started to all of a sudden get my impetus when I was 19 in the final year of my high school. It was a technical school, so it wasn't even a normal high school. And I was very much supported by the relevant teachers in redoing the year. And I got very excited about it because all of a sudden, I really wanted to do something about my learning issues. When I was 7, actually, soon after I started school, and that impacted as well, I got very, very ill. And I missed at least a quarter, if not half, of that school year as well. And it knocked my brains out. I just couldn't get it together anymore until around that time. So end of puberty. But unfortunately, my parents wouldn't allow it. So there I was, and it took another 20 years before I finally somehow found that my parents weren't the people to make choices anymore, which was good. So going to university at that time was very strange. I thought everything was somehow wrong. Who is interested in some theoretical twaddle? Why would I be interested in other people's assumptions on which they base their research? All of that was, just didn't make sense to me. I also still did run a little company at the time, and I still had a child at home as well. So none of that made sense. But I wanted to have that degree. And I wanted it because I had written a book that was about a scientific subject and a very, very much lived subject. But the lived part didn't impress the publishers. They said that I just didn't know enough about the academic side. So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to get that now. Never published that book, by the way, but I created some courses, which was quite good. So yeah, there I was, being unimpressed by what I was supposed to learn, but really interested in somehow getting myself out of that educational hole, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I created my own way of doing things. I had listened quite a bit here and there to people who had a really, really hard time at university and had found their own way of succeeding despite. And, that actually got me a first, as it did with them, which is so interesting. So I thought this has to be given on. This has to be disseminated. So I stayed at the university and I worked there with neurodivergent people for the next 15 years. And we had a lot of freedoms. We did all kinds of really fantastic stuff, learned a lot of things because nobody knew what we were actually doing. So, we had that kind of freedom. It cost us a lot of money because we weren't seen as academics, so that was a shame. But we did a lot of great work, met hundreds and hundreds of different people, all kinds of backgrounds, ages, courses, because we actually served the whole of the university. We weren't actually limited to particular courses. So you learn a lot, you learn a lot of things. Learn a lot about people. And that is, I still didn't know anything about my neurodivergence, except for the dyspraxia. And it took me about 10 years before I thought, what's happening here? These people are just like me. So I finally found out that I was combined attention different. I don't like the word ADHD. I mean, why do we still use the D at the end when we now use a C for autism at the end? I mean, how come we are still talking about the dysfunction? So I don't like to use it. So I always put it in brackets after attention differences. But I had before, when I didn't know that, I actually had gone to a psychiatrist and said, I'm really worried that I'm bipolar. I'm down, I'm up there, I start to conquer the world, and then I'm right down here again. And he ran the tests and he said, you're very close, but it's not bipolar. But at the time, there was actually no recognition at all of ADHD for adults at all. I mean, it's a long time ago. So I had to find my own way. And I actually managed to balance this out a lot. You know, I don't have that at all anymore, but I know I've got both and I need to balance it. And the key there for me was the realization that I had to learn to take down the highs, because it's so, you know, it gives you such a feeling of, I really have to use this energy now. And it's hard to actually say, but wait a second. If I allow that to go through the roof, the next thing I know, I'm right down there. So that was difficult because you think you're taking away from your creativity, you know. But the interesting thing was, and that's many years ago now, and I really can stand by that, is that means that overall you become a much more balanced person. And that really is a huge bonus. So that was good. But still, you know, you have to deal with all the everyday stuff. And that's hard. That never goes away. You know? I'm time blind. I find it very difficult to put things in sequences. I've got 3 screens and still, you know, I could just scream if I have to put one thing from here and put it somewhere else. And because I just lose it, you know, where was I? I have to literally go with my finger to the screen and follow it there. So, I mean, it was a big realization because now I knew why my body behaved in a certain way, why my head was so woody, why, you know, was up and down, and why it made sense to do certain things to become more balanced. But still, my social life was just painful. I've got family, lots of trauma impacted direct family, you know, sister and brother and sisters and brother and parents, and we were all over the place. And I just kept saying, you know, let's not lose it. Let's not lose each other, you know. But we were all impacted in different ways, and it took just that. You have to keep with it, you know, whether it makes sense or not. You just keep with it. And then I had my own family, and you know, as every complex neurodivergent mother will tell you, that's no joy looking back at your own behavior.
Right.
It's a lot of shame, a lot of despair about the things that you did wrong. And it took me many years, the better part of 8 years, I think, to also see the positive side. Because people would say to me, why are you so down on yourself? You know, I just couldn't see anything that I had done right. Your kids have actually turned out to be really great people. And I thought, well, that was despite me, not because of me. And it took many years of very painful remorse to find that balance, you know. And from time to time, I still feel, you know, very intrusive feelings about that. But I can put them in perspective now. So, but I found then as the kids grew up, and they found partners, all of a sudden we had this extended family, and they were all very different from us, very different. And that is where I became aware how hard life is. I would come home, if I would meet any of these people, totally trained. And also as my children grew up, you know, I brought them up to be independent, but that also meant that they were out of my reach, you know, out of my understanding. And it would just train me. And then the grandchildren came along. And I always knew I would do my very best for my grandchildren, and I enjoy spending time with them. But again, it was so draining. It was difficult. And then, you know, the universe gave me a gift. I had for my work, I had to do this course on autism, all the different modules, and the newest module was women and girls. And I started the course, nothing. And then I left it for a while and I came back to it. And all of a sudden I thought, goodness me, what's going on here? This is totally describing me. That was the beginning of my potential wonderings of whether I might also be autistic. And that was very, very hard, because in my family, autistic meant being totally disabled.
Mm.
And you would be the person who would be looked after by kindly people,
Right.
and you wouldn't have a brain, and you also would be a nice kind of disabled person. So that didn't go together at all. And it was a really big grieving process because of that. It took me a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, I became so aware that this actually was finally the freedom I had always looked for, because it allowed me to look after myself, to decide how, when, and to what extent I would actually go into these social situations. I could use masking consciously instead of unconsciously, keep myself safe, and slowly but surely also put my foot down very gently, because that was very necessary, and just put other people in their own perspectives,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I was required to, when I was with them, I was literally required to be like them. And of course, I never was like them. So that was from the very beginning always difficult. And it took a long time for me to actually learn how to not be like them, and at the same time not make things difficult for all of us. So I mean, that's quite a longish kind of explanation. And the end of that was that after 15, 16 years, I can't remember, working at the university, things became very, very difficult. We had new management, and not only did they not know what we were doing, but they really wanted to be in complete control without trying to understand. So for 3 years, we were trying to make them understand and to help them, excuse me, in any way we could. Didn't work at all. And then there was one really disrespectful email, too many, and that was it. I went, and actually all my colleagues went just a few months later. And what we built up over 15 years doesn't exist anymore.
Oh,
But while I was there, after a few years, I started thinking I can see certain patterns here. Sometimes students very, very quickly, all of a sudden, totally change their outlook. That was one thing. And then I was also becoming aware that certain students I saw on a relatively regular basis didn't just change their outlook, but they became totally different people. And I thought I would love to have a company that would allow me to look into that a lot more deeply. And as time went on, I realized there was a transformation process for some, and for others, it was like connecting with themselves in a way that just made their outlook very different, and I wanted to give that on to other people. So I started the company. It's about 4 years old now, but the first year was too ill. I got COVID toward the very end, really, really badly, suffered for a very long time. So it's basically 3 years old, I would say. And I had to learn everything from scratch, everything. And I'm slow in learning, but I think slow but sure, so I have to let things percolate for a long time. So here we are. What we have found is that we have been very, very good in creating events, monthly events, and they have been very popular. I'm still struggling with other parts of the business, but we have learned a lot, and we have done a lot. Yeah, but I think you connected with me through because of the events, I guess, more than anything else, isn't it?
yeah. And thank you so much for sharing your experience, especially in depth. That's my favorite place to be. It's in the deeper parts of the human being. Um, I relate to so much of what you said. I'm also dyslexic, I'm dyscalculic, autistic, ADHD, long-term impacts from a brain injury, sprinkle a little OCD over the top, and ta-da, don't worry, right? And having raised 3 children, only knowing the dyslexia part, but that knowledge doing me no good at the time. Like now, because of more recent research, we're starting to understand the function of dyslexia as opposed to the dysfunction, and the brilliance that can come out of a dyslexic mind. All of the things that we look at through the medical lens, if we can only see the complication, the difficulty, we're lost. And that perspective, I get tripped up in topics like intrusive thoughts. But very recently, I've had a little bit of a turn. Not that I would wish intrusive thinking on anyone. It's horrible. I hate it. I would love to take a shower without being mentally attacked. I have like 2 or 3 household or personal care things that are the main triggers for just intense attack. And so maybe the first thing we should do, not everybody's familiar with the concept of intrusive thoughts. I'll give my little personal description, and then maybe you could follow up with whether or not you'd like to correct me or add to what I've said. Either way, feel free. But intrusive thoughts can be a part of being OCD. They can be a part of being a person with trauma. They can come from a lot of different sources, but basically it's uninvited, often aggressive and frightening thoughts and images that just come upon you. Not always with an obvious trigger. Sometimes we can figure out what the trigger is. For me, the more simple the task, the more room there is for my brain to feel like it needs to fill space, and it fills it with terrible things. Like I will be totally fine driving the car, and then all of a sudden, if there isn't enough traffic on the road, if there isn't enough to pay attention to, if my brain, so I'm very ADHD, right? If my brain isn't doing 15 things, maybe it's only doing 13 things, those other 2 function spaces get loaded with, oh yeah, remember that trauma and remember that trauma, and what if this bad thing happens, and it can totally take over. My children struggle this way to varying degrees. One of them, when they were a teenager, those intrusive thoughts could often feel like commands. Something's going to happen, therefore you have to do this. And there was a tremendous struggle of first identifying what was going on, different from a personality disorder, and then how to start supporting this child as they grew, so that they didn't feel so commanded by these thoughts that would show up in their head. They didn't have to obey this stuff, because obeying it complicated their life tremendously. It's not like it was telling, oh, go pick flowers. It wasn't good stuff. And so there's just a really wide range of how somebody might experience and then express the result of intrusive thoughts, intrusive thinking. How did I do, Kassandra?
Yeah, very good.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm not an expert, Donnery. It's more that I've learned so much from these events. Yeah, we've run 22 so far. And we always invite some panelists as well. But at the end of the day, everybody is the same. You know, the panelists will tell their bit, and that can be very, very helpful, very nice. But everybody has got the same power in the room. And
I love that. I love that so much. I don't like the term expert. To me, it demands something of the individual they'll never be able to accomplish. All knowledge of a topic, right? None of us have all knowledge of a topic, but it also tends to lean into traditional education demands. And being somebody who doesn't do well in a traditional education setting, it's not that I don't know stuff. It's that somebody of power, I didn't pay somebody of power to bless me in my knowledge. I went and I got that knowledge myself. Not all self-taught people have a great education, and not all formally educated people have a great education. And I think if we can just remember that human beings are flawed, and we should just check it out, right? Just because I say a thing doesn't mean it's right. Check it out. It's not that you don't trust me. You might trust Don Murray's a good person and understand I could be wrong sometimes, right? So take what I say and then go do your own research. That's always my thing. And I don't care if somebody's calling themselves an expert or not. I actually don't trust people who call themselves experts.
they wouldn't come to our events, because
No.
experts don't tend to do things for free because they really want to share with other people. Specialists do sometimes, you know, and some of the panelists that come are specialists. I'm a specialist in neurodivergent understanding, you know.
Right.
I'm definitely not an expert.
Right. Because we're very aware that there's stuff we don't know. And we're never going to say we know everything.
Everything that I do is based on that you are the expert, but you might not know. For example, with intrusive thoughts, you might come to me and say, I haven't got a clue what's going on, but this has to stop. So I'm the specialist who's holding the space to help you to get to a point where you don't need me anymore as soon and as quickly as possible. That's the whole idea. Yeah. So a transformation process that can happen in that space. So I'm very familiar with intrusive thoughts. They used to plague me so badly. And of course, it gets a lot worse when they come in terms of a command. The first thing I think that you already highlighted is they are totally involuntary. Even so, we can do a lot about it. But they are totally involuntary at the moment when they come into your mind. But they are not a question of your psyche. They are not a question of your morals. They are not a question of your ethical understanding. And they are not in any way they're not there to be obeyed. That's not their role. It's not their role that's a completely different thing. You know, that it's like spiritual leak somewhere when that happens. It's not intrusive thoughts. It happens. That kind of thing can take somebody over, but that's totally different. That's not what we normally experience. And when that happens to a child, it's very difficult. And I hope you found ways around that. It's usually connected with a lot of shame. We don't talk about it as a society, because the moment a mother, for example, would say, I wanted to throw this baby out of the window, which she would never do.
Right.
One mother was saying she had always this thing in her head from time to time, which just came over her, put her in the washing machine. Of course, she would never act on that.
Yeah.
But if she would tell anybody, her baby might be taken away from her, you know. Or if you have this thing of, you know, you have a knife in your hand, or wherever you are, something explodes. You don't tell that to anyone,
right?
You know, because as a society, we take these things literally, because nearly everybody is suffering from it to some extent, feels badly about it, and suppresses it.
Right.
But what we want to do with these thoughts is not suppress it, but transform them into something that actually serves us. And from what I have learned, they come from all kinds of places, and they also have different reasons. So, for example, it seems like that a lot of neurodivergent people have got a much more sensitive nature. That goes with our brains being able to provide us with a difference, and we can do different things in the world. And part of that is that we are more aware of things, which also tends to make us more sensitive in terms of these intrusive thoughts. Autistic people tend to have a different kind of intrusive thought, and that is that they like to go into things and get stuck in things, and then it might become more compulsive, keeping yourself in that particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that can also feel like intrusive thoughts. It can also have the negative impact, that we feel with intrusive thoughts, because we still haven't necessarily chosen to think that. And especially when it keeps us awake at night or hits us at very inconvenient times, it's still an intrusive thought. OCD lends itself to that kind of thing. And it can look like an intrusive thought, but it might be a compulsive thing that's going on in us. But at the end of the day, we just don't know. We don't know. I guess we still can use the term intrusive thought if it hits us out of the blue. We haven't chosen it.
Yeah, for example, when I was younger, I didn't have so much of what I've struggled with later in life, the replaying of trauma, right? That's a lot of the intrusive thinking now. But when I was younger, I'd be walking through a store and a very strong thought, almost like another voice, would be, take that thing and put it in your pocket. And I'm grateful that I had enough confidence in my sense of self to know I don't actually want that. I don't want to do that. I would never enjoy stealing something. I would have so much guilt, so much like I had a confident enough sense of self that I could recognize that as not my thought, but it was so strong. And well before I understood my neurodivergence, I developed sort of my own sense of, okay, well, when thoughts come, like steal something, punch somebody, right? These weird out of the blue commands, remember who you are. Just because you're having a thought. I went through 2 weeks. I've never smoked anything even once in my life. And I went through 2 weeks of feeling like I have to have a cigarette, have to have a cigarette, which sounds bizarre and crazy. But for whatever reason, I was just overcome by this command to start smoking. And again, gratefully, I had a confident enough sense of self to like, I'm asthmatic, number one, like that's never going to go well. But it's not something I'm attracted to. And it doesn't matter how strong these thoughts are. And it took me 2 weeks of just really intense work with myself to overcome that and get it to stop. But I think we find whether it's connected to OCD, connected to trauma, one of the things that can make the experience of and the overcoming of intrusive thoughts difficult is if there's some kind of diminishing of one's sense of self all the way to personality disorder. Is that something you've come across in your research or in your programs? Has anybody talked about that link to personality disorder or a diminished sense of self?
Not directly as such, but you actually hit on various points. And the first thing that I remember thinking when you talked was that one reason why we get intrusive thoughts is to help us make moral decisions.
Mm.
So somebody was suggesting a therapist who was in our event on intrusive thought. He was saying it's to do with neurotransmitters that are playing up, and you get this thought which frightens you one way or another, or this command that frightens you. But then you realize I don't have to do that because I am myself, and that calms it down again. And what it gives you, for example, a dopamine hit, or for some other neurotransmitter. And of course, mainly it has to do with trauma one way or another. And again, in the same event, people were talking, and they were saying what the outcome of that is that it's intergenerational in the first place.
Mm.
Like that same person said, your parents give you everything, including everything that's in their DNA. And they got that from their parents, and they got it from their parents. And many generations don't actually put a stop to that because they don't even realize it as something that needs a stop. So either because they become a bit weird, they might actually develop psychological problems, or because they suppress it, or because for some reason they find some kind of outlet that helps them not to be bothered beyond what they can deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And then there come generations where people say, I'm going to stop that here. And I think that always has happened, because we can read that in literature. There have always been people from time to time who would just say that has to stop. And they would then break that pattern, because the DNA changes with your decisions, So it comes through the mother to the baby. For example, I was saying in that event that I always felt like I was in the middle of what happened in Germany with the Nazis. I was right there. I have seen things, I've been part of things, and I've always worried, was I perhaps part of the wrong side and did terrible things, because I could see these terrible things. However, that might be the case, I don't know. But my mother was in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
She had a father who was very, very high up, on the completely wrong side. And the children were trained to be able to see things, to hear things, to observe things directly without any kind of emotional impact on them. And she wasn't that kind of person at all. For her, it must have been a terrible trauma. And she was probably, we found out she's not talking about that, but she was probably in a concentration camp at some point, because her father probably was a commandant in there. And she also was, she was not captured, but she had to move through Russian territory in order to get back to the West, which was a very, very traumatic thing to live through. And she's not talking about it. From time to time, she would say something and we would like,
Mm-hmm.
what, And on the other side, my father was brought up by a very, very strict Catholic mother who would not ever dream, of helping Hitler in one way or another, or to show any kind of alliance. And she had very, very strong observation about what actually happened, and
Mm-hmm.
she was very aware of what happened, and she never she never suppressed that. So a very, very difficult family, very difficult dynamics. And it's very, very possible, especially with a mother who would suppress so much because she had been taught to do that. And I was the firstborn, so potentially I was seeing all these pictures that were flitting through her mind, all the feelings that she had about that she then had to suppress. And that, that therapist was saying, yeah, totally, that's what happens. And I'd heard that also from other people. I used to be a birth educator and had heard it from that side as well, that mothers give that on, but it's not the mother's fault. It's that is the problem that we have in society.
Yes.
It's not anybody's fault. It is what it is, and we can help each other to stop it, or at least to make it bearable. So that's one thing. The other thing you were saying, you did all this work, and that's what it is. We can take control. Only recently, all of a sudden, I read something and I thought, finally, I understand that. My thoughts are not my mind. My thoughts are produced by my brain, which is a machine. It's an organ that has got a certain role to play. And of course, it will be influenced by my totality, which of my experiences, which is my mind, and there's something higher behind that. But we can talk to our brain and say, this is what we allow, this is what we not allow.
Yeah.
This is what is okay, and this is what is not okay, And then the other thing and that works. But people also need to understand that they will make it worse, or at least they don't help themselves, if they are inviting ruminations, because ruminations gives your brain license to actually bring these things in, because a rumination is not something that shows any control. We're allowing stuff to happen in our mind. So the first thing, I think, is to understand rumination is linked with this, and we have to gain control over that as well. So basically, you have to put different thoughts into your brain in order to overcome that.
Absolutely. I think maybe especially for autistic people, the deep need to make sense of things, to solve a problem, right? Our draw to the familiar, the constant, all of that can make us prime candidates for rumination. The circular thinking, going over and over and over something. Maybe looking for the pattern, looking for the solve, for the solution. And I think one of the things that, if we recognize we're doing that, we can lean into a different project, so to speak. What I mean by that is, so we'll take, me, for example. I have all of this trauma in my background. And if my brain is feeding me these intrusive thoughts to try to get me to solve something, I may go over and over and over again the past experience, over and over and over again, because I haven't come up with the solve. The second I recognize I can't solve the past situation, so I have to look for a different purpose in my solution reasoning, right? Great, I can go over that past experience, but when I get to the end of that experience, instead of turning around and starting again in that circular pattern of rumination, I need to get off that highway. I have to exit, and I have to purposely aim for something else. Earlier when you said sometimes intrusive thoughts are there to help us develop our sense of morality, our sense of self that guides us. What is leading from that intrusive thought? What is leading us to a more confident, more fulfilled sense of self? And if we get caught in a rumination cycle, we can't go towards something improved. We can't go toward more confidence. We can't go toward a better sense of self, a more centered, more stable sense of self, because we're staying stuck in the cycle, right? So when we can go, oh, I'm stuck, I have to exit the highway, we have to know where we're going. Just like if we were on a roundabout and we can't just pick any exit, right? Because who knows where we're going to end up. Right? We have to choose an exit that makes sense because we need to go someplace that makes sense for us. It's the same with rumination thoughts. If we're stuck in a pattern, or even if it's not ruminating, but we have these experiences like me in the shower, right? The shower's prime candidacy for the way I work on that is to do everything in my power to stay conscious of why I'm in the shower. I'm not in the shower to limit all of the other things I think about. I'm in the shower to get clean, right? Maybe enjoy some warm water, maybe relax a muscle. If I don't hold my thinking to my present purpose, that's when all of the other stuff comes in because the rest of my life gets quiet, right? When I'm out of the shower, everything is talking to me at all times, all of the things I have to do. When I'm in the shower, my brain goes, oh, for whatever reason, pull the curtain. Outside the curtain doesn't exist. And there's too much room in my brain. But it's a wonderful opportunity to practice presence and purpose. And it's hard. But the more I stay intentionally, physically and mentally aware of my surroundings, physically and mentally aware of my purpose, the less power that intrusive thinking has. Yeah, I love that you brought up rumination. That's a
But
thing
it's
I've coached and taught about a lot, how we get stuck in those ruminating spaces and how we can take our off ramps off.
but one thing that is so important is that we understand the brain is a machine that will do whatever it does, unless we train it.
Exactly.
The automatic thoughts really that will have this negative impact. Automatic thoughts we haven't trained. And then if we are over automated because it can happen without us, then we have got the other thing that all of a sudden you have got a lot of room in your head for things that otherwise wouldn't come up. So you've got both of those things. Now we have to be very practical in terms of what can be done. And the very simplest way that I have found is you can't do anything about that first thought. Eventually you can understand that your brain is trying to help you one way or another, but it doesn't know how to do that well at all because it's going by nervous system dysregulation, which it doesn't understand. And you can't really, you cannot educate your brain unless you understand what's going on. So the very first thing that I have found has helped me and has helped other people is you accept that you can't do anything about that first thought. So there is no struggle around that, but you are in charge of the one after. And the very simplest thing can be something like, aha, yeah, because we allow the brain to just feed us. So because we don't do anything about it. So they're talking now about people who are for the first time trying to somehow get off this, or you from there you can just from that pause you can train yourself to say, is that true? Does that make sense? And of course the answer tends to be either it could be because I'm so trauma impacted I can't tell what might be from what is, and that again acceptance that we have to have if that's the case. Or it might be, what on earth? Of course, that's not true. So if we are impacted so much by trauma that we can't tell the difference, that is an absolutely sure sign that we need help.
Yeah.
Because what we need to learn then, and you don't need necessarily to pay much money, go to therapists for ages. What we need to learn there is just become clearer about how that dysregulation works. And we can learn that within one session, really. I tend to show people how that works from the midbrain, and not midbrain, because the midbrain is actually lower than the midbrain. I never understand why it's called that. It's the limbic brain, the dysfunction that has crapped the whole system is steered from there, and it does certain things, and you need to understand how the brain actually deals with that, how it actually arrives at that point where it gives you these thoughts. And that can be done within an hour, and you can really get over that within a very, very short time. People don't realize that because they use talking therapies, which might be very good for certain things, or they think, oh, they have to. We think, don't we, when we're so impacted, we think it's a huge thing. But we don't realize actually very few things in us are so huge that we can't get a grip on it one way or another. That makes our lives much more purposeful, as you said. Yeah. And that's not very well known. People think it's this huge thing and they can't do anything about it. But just as simple a thing as saying, okay, that just came into my mind. So what? What does it mean? Even just acknowledging, I don't know what to do with it. It hurts me. It makes me cry. It makes me scream. But just that little kind of, I put myself in there before my brain grabs me and just behaves as if I didn't exist, because that's what it does. Yeah. Because that's what it is. The master is missing, isn't it? So the brain is it's trying to stimulate you, So give it another kick. Wake up. It's like a child, it's like a child who is kicking the mother, that the mother finally puts the phone down and says, here, I'm present. The brain doesn't do something very different. It knows something isn't right, but it can't sort it out itself. It needs us to help to sort it out. Does that make sense?
Yes, all of this, at least to me, these are things that, I love psychology. I've been studying it for years from many different angles. And again, before I understood my neurodivergent identity, I started in therapy for the very first time around the age of 45, 46, 47 years old, somewhere in there. And my first few therapists made me worse by a lot, like to a scary degree. And I knew I had to figure out what was going wrong because I knew I needed some help. I knew my trauma had become too much for me. But the therapy experience was all wrong. And for me, you're right, talk therapy is great for some. But I think many of us neurodivergent people have the type of memory that if you ask us to share an experience, we will share in the brain and body feel of going through it for the first time. We will relive the experience in order to share it with you. And if we don't know how to step aside from that reliving, we will re-traumatize and re-traumatize and re-traumatize. And talk therapy will go, I don't know what's going on. Maybe we need to talk about it again. And that's not going to work. And so that was one of the things that I figured out for myself. I can't go to a therapist who's going to demand I talk about my trauma. And I can't go to a therapist who's going to be shocked by my trauma. I finally found a therapist who was neurodivergent themselves, and had worked with different populations so that I felt more confident that they weren't going to be shocked by some of the things I had been through, because I can't get triggered into taking care of my therapist. I need to stay in the belief that the therapist's there to help me take care of myself. And I make the joke that I break therapists. My life has been stupid hard, right? the therapist doesn't understand why I'm relatively okay in so many ways, right? They want me to be more broken. And I can't have my therapist wondering why I'm not more broken. I need them to trust the work that I've done, right? So finding the right therapist is a really big deal. And I talk to therapists on my YouTube channel. But I think it's really important to recognize that your specific makeup, your neurodivergence, can guide you to the type of therapy that you need. If you think about, okay, how do I learn best? How do I take in and process information? How do I feel the most confident giving that information back? That can lead you to maybe an art therapist or a music therapist would be the right thing for you. Though I don't personally appreciate behavioral approaches, some people get great benefit out of cognitive behavioral therapy and other behavioral approaches. A little bit of working on knowing yourself if you can, right? Maybe you need a coach to help you figure out some of the ways that you function so that you can then go look for a good therapist. But that therapy piece can be exceptionally valuable. To getting that understanding. And I think you and I are a lot alike, Kassandra, in that if we understand, we're good, right? The second we know, oh, that's how that works, fine, I'm good. I can leave now, right? Because I can take that understanding and run with it. Not everybody can, and it's okay if you know, if you're like Kassandra and me, it's okay if understanding a thing only is your first step and you need help and guidance to continue to understand and what to do with that understanding. But Kassandra, what you've been saying repeatedly, we can get a grip on this because we are actually in control of our minds. We are the driver of our bus, the captain of our ship. We're the ones that we're supposed to be in charge, and maybe our lives haven't taught us how to be in charge. And we can get help to learn how to be in charge, but our brains are there to be, like you said, a tool, a useful tool. And they need to be trained to give us what's actually helpful, what's useful, and not just throw stuff at us to see if it all works. Do you have any concluding, man, this hour went so fast. Do you have any concluding thoughts you'd like to share on this topic?
There's some things that have worked for other people. So we have shared what works for us, which is really good. So the whole point that we need, it doesn't matter where we are at the moment, whether we are completely floored by it, whether we have got a bit of an understanding, whether we are doing really well. The most important thing is suppression doesn't work. Even so, we have to set it aside, obviously. Otherwise, it's totally flooring us if we can't do anything about that yet. But suppression will always make things work, and it doesn't only make it work worse for us, it makes it worse for everybody around us. And if we are young enough, we have children, or we will have children, we just give it on. So that is not really a great option at all. So we always try to transmute, we try to get a handle on it, you know, and our minds might not be yet there for us to really get a grip on it, but we can start talking to our brain about it, you know. We can ask questions of the brain, we can then think about who we are, like you said, you know. Are we people who benefit most from a good bit of laughter? So some people put a chester on it, you know, they hear this terrible thing, they just say, nothing, never heard something as stupid as that.
Yeah.
Some people think about something more physical, they crunch it, or they let it explode, or they step on it, or whatever, you know. For some people, they are very verbal, they need to really talk it out and just say, you know, this obviously can't be good one way or another. How did you get to this? I've now come to that point where I say only two things, and I've read that somewhere. It's not my original thought. There are only two things that you're allowed to do. One is you give me useful thoughts, and the other one is you give me joyful thoughts. Everything else you keep to yourself until you actually put it away and you don't think about it anymore. And of course, it will happily bombard me with all kinds of stuff. I say, that's neither useful nor, nor happy. The other thing that's also important, you have to think about how you want to act on life. As long as you want to be a victim, which is very difficult to overcome if you've got a lot of trauma, but as long as you want to be a victim, everything we say here will not impact you in any positive way. If you want to revenge yourself on the world or on certain people, you will keep stuck in the rumination, because that's how the game works. There's only one way forward, and that is you wanting to improve not only yourself but the world, one way or another. And most people do that by choosing kindness. If they can, they choose love, whether we know exactly what that is or not. But those positive things, and you can't overcome it with a negative mindset set, that it's not possible. Some people, one lady was saying she names something that intrudes on her brain 3 times, and that makes it too conscious for it to continue. But I think she was talking more about something that connects a specific happening that connects then with more intrusive thoughts. So, for example, she hears a dog barking, and she will say, before that can happen, actually those connections can happen, she will say 3 times, a dog is barking, a dog is barking, a dog is barking, and that cuts that off. That works for her. Journaling to trace the bigger picture here can be quite useful, So for me, for example, eventually I became very aware that there were 2 main things that really impacted on me for a long time when I was younger. One was that I would always get those intrusive thoughts that had to do with war and with very, very unhappy things happening in war. And the other one was about somebody wanting to kill me. And I think even so, that didn't, I think that was the one where I thought, I'm not quite sure about this, I've been getting these thoughts that somebody is coming in with a knife for years now. Should they not have been here if that was true? Or what you were saying, these commands, I actually hadn't thought about that, but I used to have those commands as well, take this. And it's interesting where that might come from. Perhaps it's really, we have been told we are morally defect one way or another. And we need to strengthen our moral by saying, I'm not going to do that. But it's very easy to break down at some point. Because I used to, when I was very small, I had a very, very strong ethics. I remember that. And because we lived with a grandmother, and the grandmother would feed us every day, very plant stuff. And then she would throw those feasts, and we weren't invited. We lived in the same house, but all the rest of the family were invited, and we were not invited ever. So we had all these delicious smells, we saw all these wonderful things. We were only allowed to eat the rest, but of course everything really nice had gone, and only the plant stuff was left. And my sister, bless her, she was 2 years younger, she said, let's steal that, because my grandmother put it in the fridge, and the fridge was outside the kitchen. And we were sitting on the stairs of outside the kitchen with the fridge underneath us. And I would say, we can't do that, we can't steal. And she would say, the only way to get it. And we started stealing. And of course, my grandma couldn't say anything, because ethically it wasn't at all right that she would exclude us, I'm sure she knew exactly how many of these things she had made and how many were left over. And, it was a catastrophe, because it led us to really big mental health problems.
Yeah.
I'm sure both of us could have easily been hit with one of those terrible diagnoses where we would be medicated and so on. And all it was a breakdown. The temptation was too big for a small child being tempted that way,
Yeah.
you know? And then who knows what it leads to? And maybe we should keep that in mind a bit more, when we start judging other people's behavior. Maybe they just have been tempted beyond what they could do. When I was older,
Yeah.
I came back to my own ethics and I wouldn't steal anymore. But temptation, let's say somebody in a clothes shop, they have got nothing to wear. The temptation might just be too big. They have got nothing to eat. There are so many people who have hardly anything to eat.
Right.
Maybe the temptation is too strong. They have never been loved. They only had people who never actually really cared about them. And then this guy comes along, he's married, but he seems to really love them. Temptation to, So I think, again, if you start choosing love, life makes a lot more sense, but it's also so much kinder to yourself and everybody else. Some pause the mental film before it gathers momentum, but you really have to learn to stop that, stop it very carefully just by saying but second thought. And others were saying they had just to learn radical self-kindness.
I love that.
Which is interesting. And the last one was, no, there are two more. People said they're doing something like breath work, exercise. Lots of people exercise, as you said, to keep it out of their minds. People listen to things. I do that sometimes because I have that as well. I do gardening work. My mind is getting more and more, quiet. Bang, it comes in. So the crunchy foods, some people found that really helpful when they thought intrudes crunch food, and keeping a feel-good folder of positive feedback, especially when the intrusion is a lot about that you're not good enough, that you make too many, something like that. Yeah, so these were the kind of things that came up. And the last issue I would like to quickly talk about, because it might affect quite a few people who are meditators like me, and I never understood why meditation was so difficult for me. And it's for the same reason as when you meditate, your mind becomes calmer and calmer and calmer. And you'd never meditate with a blank mind. You should always have something anyway, as a spiritual guide. You never get a blank mind. That's not good. You always, think about whatever is a really positive something, even if it's just light or love or whatever it might be. But nevertheless, the brain obviously starts calming down. So the intrusive thoughts come in. And I think an awful lot of people get floored by that, because what we think is, or what we are told, this is good for us. And
Right.
what we find is exactly the opposite. I mean, I would do it anyway because I had very, very good guidance. But so many people actually can't do it. And recently there was a research project and they found that 60% of people who try to meditate can't do it.
Wow.
And they can't do it because they haven't got the guidance to keep understanding what they need to do in order to eventually minimize that. And nobody tells them that might be completely normal.
Right.
You might find that your brain just gets bombarded with stuff and you cry, you want to meditate and you cry. So anybody who listens to that and wants to meditate and had trouble, find something where you get a community of people who can hold you and, you can talk to as well. It's actually something nobody talks about. And this research was such an eye-opener. I thought, that's me. I finally know that is normal. Yeah. So anyway.
I find meditation very, very difficult. For one thing, my ADHD brain doesn't necessarily enjoy. I get bored so easily. But yeah, the idea of quieting the mind. So I do different forms of meditative practice where it's not necessarily quieting, it's remaining, like I was talking about before, remaining mentally and physically connected to the present. I have a practice that I developed a number of years ago, which is to um, choose an object, touch it, name it, say its use, and give it gratitude. And the process of going through that, you really come to presence. If you're feeling a thing, you're touching it, right? You're naming it, you're explaining what it's useful for, and you're giving it gratitude. And we don't have time to talk about all the reasons why those things are beneficial, but especially if I'm in it, that can snap me out of, an intrusive thought attack or an anxiety attack. Is, I'll use my phone, sitting in front of me, right? I'll pick up my phone. I'm like, this is my phone. And I use this for calls, but it also is also useful for my email. I play brain games on it. It's one of these ones that fold in and out so that it helps me with my vision. And I'm so grateful for my phone because of all the things that it helps me do. It makes me feel connected to people. It means I don't have to be in front of my computer all the time, right? And I go through the gratitude list. And what that took me maybe a minute and a half. But lots of things happened in my body and in my brain. I had to think about one thing, because if I'm going to come up with the words for all of that, right? If I'm going to be specific, that's a challenge. That's a brain challenge. And it'll pull more focus to the present, right? So there are different practices that you can do if traditional meditation doesn't work for you. There are a lot of different things that you can do to get your brain's attention and keep it with you and keep it working on your behalf instead of bombarding you with fear or commands or whatever it's doing to you. You really can learn how to be a good partner, you and your brain. Kassandra, thank you so much for the time that you took today and for all the things that you shared. I hope we talk again soon. There were so many topics that you sent me that were possibility. We could do a lot of these. I'm very excited about the work that you're doing. Let's stay in touch. And yeah, I hope we can come back again sometime soon and do another one of these.
You take care. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thank you.